Welcome, Steelers Nation. I'm Max Starks, former Steeler offensive lineman and also a member of the Steelers radio broadcast team. And I am joined by two distinguished gentlemen, two gentlemen I've known since my first day as a little pup coming into the Southside facility. We have Director of Pro Player Personnel himself, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Brandon Hunt, and also one of the lead scouts who's been here since 2004, my rookie year, Mr. Dave Petett. How are you gentlemen doing today?
Great.
Doing excellent, Max. Thanks for having us.
So many words. well, just to give everybody in Steelers Nation kind of a heads up, what we're doing here is we wanted to have, since it is Black History Month, we are in the month of February, we wanted to honor and talk about and have a conversation about a legend, pioneer, for not only from the NFL scouting ranks, but also what Bill Nunn meant to the whole face of football. And when we talk about it, historically Black colleges and universities, his contributions, and of course, which led to his enshrinement this past year, to know that, like, he was an editor at the Pittsburgh Courier, to then coming in and scouting all of the Black colleges. And he had the inside track, right? I mean, that's something that was special, especially when you think about what happened in the 70s for the Steelers. Like, that was just such a special moment. From that perspective, was there something particular that you learned from that perspective as far as how to watch film, how to grade guys, or how to go above and beyond to find those little gems and nuggets as you comb through everybody's stats, film, highlights, parent requests, background checks? Like, what did y'all learn from Bill Nunn that helped you have a more discerning eye, so to speak?
I think Brandon and I both say the same thing coming up with Coach Nunn. The main thing he told us to focus on, first and foremost, was a player's athletic ability. Look at their feet, how do they move? Because a lot of times if you come in, especially because, we played in college and you kind of hear everything from a coaching perspective, but that's not what our job is. And he made that very clear. You want to see a guy, how they move, how they can bend. And then also, you want to be able to get as much information as you can about the guy. So, you can also evaluate the person and how the person can help you.
Yeah, coming from Bill Nunn's era. And, right now everybody's so caught up in measurables, like how big the person is or how big is their hands and some of those things. Like Dave said, the number one thing that Nunn wanted to know was athleticism. He liked looking at multiple sport athletes. He liked to look to see guys do other things like basketball or dance. And he looked at footwork and he looked at movement and change of direction. And that's where it all started, When he got in and he was with us and as time started evolving, no disrespect, but he hated to see the 6'7s and the 330s and how people were getting bigger. And as the game got bigger, in his opinion, it was starting to get away from athleticism. And the one thing he would always pull us aside is never forget the main thing, which is athleticism across all positions. They either are or they are not athletes. And then athleticism is something that you can't become. So if you don't have that baseline, you're not ever going to get it. And that's where we always start when we put on any tape, whether it's pro or whether it's college, at an all-star game, scouting a game or anything.
Okay. So you're saying that I was already one strike against with Mr. Nunn. No, that's good to know. It's good to know. I shook the shell, broke it a little bit. That's cool.
No, you were an exception.
Okay. Outlier. Okay.
There's exceptions.
Thank y'all for making me feel good. I tell you what, when you think about kind of where we've come, right? I mean, from the first time Bill Nunn came in and was hired as a scout under chief to kind of progressing to where we saw the merger of the AFL, the NFL in 1970. And those great Steelers teams of the 70s, which had kind of opened the eyes for a lot of Black colleges to get more guys. Because when you look at where the Steelers got a bulk of that nucleus talent in the 70s, it was from Black colleges. And obviously things have changed a little bit now. There's easier access to tape. It's not an actual 16 millimeter roll you only got one copy of it, to now everything's on Huddle, and you've got so many different avenues of accessing it. In the tape study and kind of how Bill Nunn really cut his teeth, can you guys just give me an insight to what he did back in the Pittsburgh Courier days when he was the managing sports editor, and how he became, because he was a basketball player,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? Like, so to then come back home to, take a role at your dad's paper, and to then transition to football. Can you just tell us kind of stories that he shared with you about what intrigued him about football and what kind of drew him in that direction with the basketball background?
One of the cool things that he knew, and Max, you're alluding to, but didn't necessarily get there, was while working for the Pittsburgh Courier, he had the opportunity to create the All-American team, the HBCU All-American team. And as he made those teams, the players were being evaluated and they were brought into town. And, the chief was seeing like, hey, wait a minute, if somebody this close has this type of access and familiarity with these players, I need to get that guy in the building. And because Nunn had the background from the reporter and doing the stuff in writing and in journalism, a lot of things that we do in scouting is sources, and having sources and resources, and the people that know the most people and have the most comfort in these buildings are the ones that basically get the best information, because you're familiar at these schools. And obviously Nunn had relationships at all these places, so it was obvious plug and play for him to get in the building here. And then the opportunity to already be able to get into those schools, and the talent that was already there, was an easy transition for him from journalism into the National Football League and scouting.
And I think, Max, like the question that you asked about his past and where he came from, like there's a picture. I mean, Nunn, he's a Westinghouse High School guy. There's a picture online, and it's of 3 Westinghouse basketball players. I don't know who the third guy is, but it's Bill Nunn and Chuck Cooper. Chuck Cooper was the first African American to play in the NBA. They were on the same high school basketball team. So he was around, and obviously Chuck Cooper was good too, because he made it all the way to the NBA. So that's the kind of people he was around. He was an athlete himself, and he was also around great athletes. And then as a journalist, I mean, he knew all the guys of the day, whether it was Jackie Robinson, whether it was Ezra Charles, Floyd Patterson. He knew all these guys. So I just kind of think it was just like an easy carryover. He was accustomed to athletes. He knew what athletes looked like. He knew what they sounded like, what they talked like. And his job with the Courier prepared him, like his reputation by the time he got with the Steelers and was scouting at schools, his reputation had preceded him to these places. When he got to a school, it was, hey, Bill Nunn's coming. Man, when I go to a school visit or Brandon goes to a school visit, it's not an event. When he would go to a school, especially down in the South, and you have to remember, because of segregation, he had to have those contacts, because it wasn't like you could just stay anywhere. So if he goes to a school, he has to know people at the school, because he's got to find a place to stay, he's got to find a place to eat, and he's got to be able to get his work done. So that was just the connections and the familiarity he had with athletes, and then his job making contacts. All that stuff helped him become a great scout, and also help the Steelers win 4 Super Bowls.
Actually, 6. He was here for 6 Super Bowls.
Yeah.
Talk like Dave was saying. Talk about blazing trails, and in this sport, we take a lot of stuff for granted in scouting, doing our job every day, traveling the country, eating great, staying in hotels, going to games, and how easy and seamlessly we're able to do this thing right now. If you really think back to Nunn, everyone's like, oh yeah, Nunn went to these schools and got these great players, but outside of football, like Dave just alluded to, that wasn't easy. He ended up, one of the stories that he tells me that kind of blows me away is that when he went to Grambling, he stayed at the great Eddie Robinson's house. And that's where he stayed. And obviously he used it as an opportunity to also get information. But, here's 2 greats together. And the reason he's there is because he has to be there. Like Dave said, that is where he got a chance. That's the only place he could stay when he went. And then and Dave mentioned some of the greats that he knew, he knew Jackie Robinson and company because when they came to Pittsburgh, guess where they stayed? They went to the Hill and they were hanging with Nunn. So like the relationships were built naturally, but they were built basically because they had to be, because coming up in that time, like they were who they had, and that's how they had the opportunity to be great together.
No, absolutely. I think that was something that I'm glad you hit on it, Brandon and Dave, because I think we kind of fast forward always to the 70s, and we always kind of forget the 60s and the 50s and what life was. And because William Goldwyn Nunn Jr., the full name, we all know him as Bill Nunn, had such a bravado. But like you said, life still moves. I mean, that's the difference. Like, we love sports, and sports is a great release and an avenue of outlet. But he was also doing it at a time where great things were happening. As you list all those other pioneers, and he's a pioneer, is that, and being a kid that grew up in the South and knowing that type of history, to get to these places was not easy. And the things you endured that we now talk about, and like you said, we take for granted, there's a process there. And there's also a certain sense of endurance, of resiliency to get the job done, to give these kids access, to give them a spotlight, and to make sure that they matter and that they're seen, and that, like Dave said, athleticism, athletic ability, let's not lose sight. Tremendous athletes that were here. And this wasn't an Alabama team that we see in 2020. That team would have been at Grambling back in 1960 or 1962. It wouldn't have been. And then we have guys like John Mitchell on staff as well. One of the first guys that played for Bear Bryant is African-American. So it's just tremendous, the amount of history that's surrounding the Steelers. And of course, but I think it starts with Bill Nunn and his, not to say blessing or tapping because he earned everything he got, but the credit, the street cred, getting it from Chief and being legitimized by becoming a staff member, even if it was, a little bit later than it should have been, it still happened. And when you think of the integration and the mergers that happen, he's right there at the forefront, kind of spearheading that charge, and we never know about it. I want to ask this one last question before we go, and just talk about your colleagues and buddies around the league, and just how they interacted with Bill Nunn. Like, I mean, we have the combine coming up, right? That's the big mass time where everybody kind of gathers in Indianapolis. What was it like, when Bill Nunn was there with you guys going to combine, and then just kind of talk about his impact throughout the league with different scouts across all the other 31 other teams, and what it meant to be kind of in that presence and understand the foundation that he laid?
I don't think I've never really come across anybody, because by the time I had started and Brandon had started, Coach Nunn was off the road. So the people who still remembered him were usually older guys, and everybody, hey, how's Bill doing? How's Coach Nunn doing? And guys who are here, Kevin Colbert did school visits with Nunn, Ron Hughes, guys like that. As far as I know, his reputation was awesome because of, I was talking to Phil Kryler, our college director, about it, and Nunn took you for, if you did your work and if you came to an opinion the right way by doing the work and evaluating and everything and didn't take shortcuts, he's going to respect you, and he was going to help bring you along too. And his influence, has spread along, you're talking to two of us right now. We got, it was black and white. It was pretty much everybody. We've had all of our scouts who have come through here, who were here with Coach Nunn. They have all been influenced. He didn't, kowtow to one side or the other. If you did the work, if you listened, and didn't think you had all the answers, but were willing to try to get better and everything, man, he would rock with you. And as far as the older guys on the road, hey, how's he doing? I think it's because they cared. They knew how significant he was, not just, to our team. He was obviously very significant, but to the league, to scouting, not even just, as a African-American scout, but just to scouting. He kind of, what he was able to do and what the Steelers were able to do in the 70s helped legitimize our profession. And I think, that's a credit to him and everybody who's kind of walked in these shoes. It doesn't matter your team, you kind of owe him. And, there were other pioneers as well like him, but you owe those guys a lot of credit, because without them, the NFL could have taken a different path, and, we'd be without jobs or something. So.
Yeah, we're in a mighty special place. Like everybody knows, the culture has been set and the culture is in place, and that's why we are capable to show up each and every year anticipating making a run for a Super Bowl. And you hear the standard is a standard, and you hear it and you read it and you hear about the Steeler way. The Steeler way is because of the things that the chief and because of the things that Nunn and the people before us put in place. And having an opportunity myself to go work in Houston and then come back to work in Pittsburgh, I had a chance to work with Bobby Greer, and he was working at the time for the Texans, but he came up with the New England Patriots. So it was kind of cool to get another perspective of a colleague that Nunn had a chance to work with on the road. And everybody that we run into, like Dave said, he wasn't on the road like that, but people knew, like, hey, how's Nunn doing? Or people that they didn't necessarily have experience with him, but they read and they knew, like, oh man, you guys get the chance to work with Nunn. Me and Dave and I are pretty proud of the intern program that we have here. And the one thing that Nunn did was he put his hands on everybody that had an opportunity to work in that intern chair. And everybody had a chance to get on those drives with them. And everybody got a chance for him to drop some nuggets and to drop some bars on them. And anyone that he put his hands on, he was gonna give you information, he was gonna teach you, and he was gonna groom you, and he was gonna train you at whatever that was, whether it was football, whether it was life, whether it was family, whether it was the city of Pittsburgh, whether it was basketball. He was gonna take that opportunity to put a couple little nuggets in your place. And Gorse termed the drop-offs when you get the chance to take Nunn home as the long goodbye. And unfortunately, when you drop off Nunn, he would always start the story when you get to make that left turn by his house. And that's where the story would start. And again, in this microwave era where we're always in a rush to go, another thing we took for granted. But we should have slowed down, and some of us did, make no mistake about it. And if we had known, take every one of those nuggets, and that's when we should have taken our notebook out, and that's when we should have started taking these notes. And I say it all the time, nobody has really, he didn't write a book on himself because he didn't want to, but what he did was he took and he placed a couple little chapters in each and every one of us. And if you get all of us together, and then add Sydney and Linnell and all his family and Matthew, the grandkids, put us all together, and you'll get the Bill Nunn story, and you get the Bill Nunn book, and it's obviously etched in these walls, and it's obviously in the trophy room, and Max, with yourself and your former teammates, each and every one of us has a little touch of Nunn, and that's exactly the way he would want it to be, and it's just a blessing to have an opportunity to be a part of it.
Hey Brandon, hey Max, real quick, what Brandon's talking about with the long goodbye. We'd have to give him a ride home sometimes, and Behun, you can back me up on this. You park in front of his house, and you got your foot on the brake, and he gets to talking, and then he's talking for a little bit, then you put the car in park, and he's talking a little bit more, and then you realize you're going to be there for a while. You just cut the thing off, man, and then, you'd be sitting out in front of his house, and he would be schooling you, and he'd be asking you questions about people, football people, or just, significant people from the past. And it was a history lesson. It was because he was actually like a link to the past. Like Brandon said, you'd be riding in the car with him and he'd start talking about Jackie, and you're sitting there like, wait a minute, I think he's talking about Jackie Robinson. And I'm like, man, I'm riding on the road with a guy that knew Jackie Robinson personally. And he's talking about Rachel Robinson, that's his wife, who, is still with us today. He knew these people, and that's why he was so easy to get along with, because he has so much credibility. Like when I started in 2000, when me and you started in 2004, it was our rookie year. Yeah, it was Coach Nunn. I sat in the back of the draft rooms. I was a young guy, but I sat in the back with Coach Nunn and Joe Green. And I mean, I was young. I was whatever young guys are at the time, and I had the privilege to sit in the back with two legends, and they could play right off of each other. Nunn was to scouting what Joe Green was to football, is to football, and that's something that we've really been fortunate to have around here, and he's just the lessons, his legacy to me, and like what Brandon said with the chapters, we all have different parts of the story. We could all put it together, and it would be there'd be a lot of different versions to that book and everything like that. But it would definitely be interesting, and it definitely helped me. And I can't speak for Brandon. I'm sure it holds the same, but it helped me in my personal knowledge of history, Black history, Pittsburgh history, and football. I mean, he kind of schooled us in everything, and that's why we're so endeared to him today.
Absolutely.
No, I mean, just getting this opportunity to share this, we've already shared moments in those chapters, right? And I hope that we continue to do that. This is the first step. I mean, as an organization, to have this conversation, Steelers Nation, we want to thank you guys for tuning into this conversation. This is not a one-off. This is just a start, but creating these memories where we have these trailblazers, because a lot of pioneers have walked through those doors, a lot of trailblazers, a lot of history has been made during this time and era. The Pittsburgh Steelers have been an organization, especially when you think of the Rooney's role and what they play within the NFL. So I want to close out the interview there. I want to thank you, gentlemen. I know it's draft prep time, combine time's right around the corner. So thank you to Steelers Nation, Pittsburgh Steelers Radio Broadcast Network. You've been listening to a conversation about Bill Nunn, and hopefully there'll be some more. Take care.